I wanted to share with you guys about my dad, something that he saw, which started my initial love for this type of podcast. So I'll leave my name out of it for now, but we're in Ohio, Cincinnati, and he was more east of Cincinnati, probably more where I guess you were located. I can't quite remember the place, but they had some farmland. This was back in the 60s. My dad probably between 6 and 8 years old. Him and his parents and his younger brother, 2 younger brothers, I believe. Actually, I think they might have been 3. I can't remember if my uncle was born then. But they were all in the car driving home. And when they got there, they noticed something and realized that they were looking at basically a UFO, shape. And just, I don't know how far. He said maybe 100 yards from the front yard or the front porch. He said it's kind of hazy on what he remembers, but he does remember it being sausage-shaped and that it had those undulating lights kind of just going in circles, and that his dad noticed it first and his mom, and they got out of the car. And bits of what he does remember is that at some point they were all standing in a row just staring at it. What he only recently brought up to me in his many tellings of this story, I guess based on a conversation he had with his brother, my uncle, one thing that they recently remembered was how odd it was that they were standing in a row based on height, from being my grandfather, my grandmother, my dad, so on. That I had never heard before, so that was new to me, which made it more interesting. My dad's a straight edge guy, military man. He might make a big fish story and exaggerate, but he's pretty straightforward. And the scarier part of the story, the one that I grew up remembering and the one that I'll never forget and have told my children and will tell my grandchildren, is what they saw. So later on that evening, they were inside, and my uncle and my dad shared a bedroom. They were young and little. And my uncle shot out of bed and went to the back window, which he had to kind of stand up on his toes to look out of because he swore he saw something. And my dad joined him. And when my dad got to the window, all he saw was a little creature, child size, basically hopping the fence and running away. My uncle's the one that saw it looking into the window, which had not the window, but the creature or the alien, if you will, had that gray skin, large forehead, large eyes, all black. And now obviously it was dark. I don't have much more details than that. They were young, but we all have those vital or real vivid memories from when we were little. And I imagine this was my uncle's, and I know for sure it was my dad. It's one that he swears by. He's a big avid fan of all things UFO because of that experience. But more importantly is my grandma remembering it, and I call her Granny, and her real hesitation to ever retell the story. She kind of just nods in agreement and changes the subject, which is definitely not like her. But I thought it'd be interesting, worth telling. Again, big fan. Thank you guys. Take care.
Thank you, caller. Now, coincidentally, my dad also saw something unexplained around the same time and place. The story he tells goes as follows. Apparently, he and his brothers, and I believe my grandmother, saw something crash beyond the hillside above their house. They never saw it make impact with the earth, but they claimed it glowed a bright orange color, lighting up the entire hillside. Now, my dad, grandmother, and several of my aunts and uncles all saw this thing take place. My grandma was so shaken up by it that she refused to let anyone go outside for hours after the event. Now that's where the similarities stop, because our caller's father actually laid eyes on some sort of creature. Now I don't know what year her father saw the creature, but it could have been less than a decade away from a very famous creature sighting from that general area. Now I've touched on it before, but it's certainly something worth revisiting. And of course I'm talking about the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins.
This event occurred in 1955 at the Sutton family farmhouse in Christian County, Kentucky, over the span of one evening and into the following morning, where 2 families consisting of 11 people, 7 being adults, saw something strange in the sky, but thought nothing of it until a creature peeked in through the window of the house. Panicked by what they saw, a 3 feet or 1 meter tall creature with pointy ears, metallic skin, and clawed hands, the men grabbed their firearms and investigated. Taking their shot at rather close range, the bullets seemed to be deflected by some unknown shield, and one creature afterwards just floated to the ground. Scared, they barred themselves into the house just to hear the creatures skittering across the roof, peering in through the windows and causing chaos. Making a dash to their cars, they informed the police, who then investigated the house, finding scratch marks and hearing the same sounds the family had. Finding nothing else, the police departed. UFOologists regard this incident as one of the most documented and significant UFO cases in history.
That clip comes courtesy of Top 10 Archive on YouTube. Now you can check out each video from every clip by visiting monstersamonguspodcast.com and clicking on the show notes tab. There you'll find a shortcut to each and every video used in every episode of every season. Thank you so much, caller, for taking the time to share your story. I certainly wish we got a photo, or at least a drawing of the creature that your father saw. Our next call of the evening takes us to the state of Oklahoma. The following is McT's story.
Hello, Derek and Monsters Among Us crowd. My name's Mick T. from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I have a story that I believe you guys will enjoy. It takes place back in 2011. I worked at a big box store at the period. Night stocking supervisor, drove the forklifts, stocking stuff inside, outside. One evening, it was just myself and one other employee. I was out in the lawn and gardens section outside, putting stuff in the upper racks, driving one of those stand-up forklifts. And the other individual was inside the building at the other end in the lumber section. Well, I had just paused, turned off the machine, and I was still standing in it as I turned around, looking behind me down the aisle, and full-on shadow person walks from right to left towards the entrance going into the building. As it walked, it was darker than dark, but yet I could still see the shelving behind it. I could see its arms and legs and its head as it turned and looked at me and continued to walk towards the doors. My eyes bulged out of my head, obviously. The doors opened up for this entity and it went into the building. I jumped off of the machine and ran to the doors that were beside me. I lost the entity once it entered the building, but I continued to walk through the building to try to find this thing. What I found interesting was, as it would have approached the front end of the store, where the cash registers and things like that were, the alarm system went off at the entrance of the building as if somebody walked out with a security monitored product. And at that point, I started to really freak out because I wasn't sure if I actually saw a shadow person or a real person. So I ran towards the front of the store, thinking that maybe there was a person in the building. As I got to the front, the other alarm system started to go off midpoint in the store, but I could see at this point there was nobody there. Anyways, that's the story of that particular evening at that particular location. I ran off towards the other employee to find out where their location was, and they were on a forklift, the other end of the store, with headphones on, doing their own thing. And I stopped them and asked them if they saw anybody, and they said no. And they got off the machine and walked with me through the store, and there was nobody there. Anyways, that's it. It was empty. We were locked in. There wasn't any way anybody could get in or get out without me letting them in or out. So, pretty interesting. I've seen these things before, but that particular one, creating alarm systems going off, was pretty interesting. But I do know that there has been deaths in and around that location. There's a train tracks that run directly behind the facility through that part of town. And I do know of one specific death in particular that was related to my ex-wife's family. So, I don't know. It's definitely interesting. Anyways, that's that story. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks. Enjoy the show.
Thank you, McT. It's kind of weird. You don't expect a location like a Home Depot to be haunted. Or to be honest, you don't expect any kind of activity there at all. Now, it kind of reminds me of something I remember hearing a few years back. The gentleman, whom I can't remember, said the following that really made me think. He said that ghosts are everywhere. Literally everywhere. He went on to say that you may have even had an encounter yourself and didn't realize it, shopping the aisles of your local Walmart. Now, I don't specifically believe that ghosts are roaming the halls of Walmart, but I do think what he said was interesting. How many times have we laid eyes on something paranormal and thought it was simply normal? An idea like that can quickly change the way we look at ghosts or hauntings in general. Thanks again, McT. I really enjoyed the questions this call made me think of. Our next submission for the evening comes to us from Arlo in the state of Washington and covers one of my favorite cryptozoology subjects. Hi, Derek. My name is Arlo, and I'm 9 years old, and I live in Washington. I love the podcast. It is truly amazing. Anyway, let me share my story. My mom was taking me home from Christmas shopping, and we were driving down a back road, and right out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing on all four legs. It was shocking. I did not know if it was a man looking for something or if it was a creature of the night. Well, that's my story. Thank you, Arlo. Well, thank you, Arlo. I should point out that Arlo titled his submission Werewolf, so I think it's safe to say that that's what he thinks he saw. Now, as I said in the intro to the submission, the dogman or werewolf phenomenon is one of my favorite cryptozoology subjects. The Beast of Bray Road is certainly something that tugs at my heartstrings. So thank you again, Arlo, for taking the time to share your submission. Our next call of the evening comes to us from a listener in Georgia. The following is Gary's call.
Good afternoon, Derek. My name is Gary, and I'm calling from Georgia. First, I want to preface the call by saying I've been catching up on some of your episodes, and one of the things I have learned through the episodes is you and I have a similar situation where we both had brothers who were younger than us take their own lives, so I can understand that. One of the things that has helped me is I am a licensed mental health professional in the state of Georgia, so I'm familiar with dealing with that a little bit better, and I've been able to help my family through that. One of the things I would like to do is talk to you more about the mental health part of things, since you do reach an audience that may have some troubles. So it's definitely something I would like to talk to you about later. But for right now, I want to share my encounter about a big black cat I saw when I used to live in Ohio when I was younger. I lived in the Akron, Kent, Ravenna area. There was a bridge that went over the Cuyahoga River, which often flooded when I was younger. Now, this was probably about when I was 9 to 10 years old when we lived in this area. So my family and I were on our way home. I was driving in the car, and there was a bridge that we would go over that crossed over the Cuyahoga River. And under the bridge, there could be seen something floating down, the river. The river was flooded at this time, which was not uncommon. Where we lived, when it flooded, would also come into our backyard, and because we live very close to the river. But there was a car that was stopped on the bridge before us, and I remember my father was a little annoyed by it and blew his horn, and the car just sped off. And when he got onto the bridge, he stopped and was, kind of looking over the bridge and was like, "What's that?" So I remember sticking my head out the window, looking out to see what he was looking at. And what I saw was what looked to be like a panther on a boat. Seems kind of odd, but it's not really when you think about it, because that river often flooded, and there was a person who had a fishing boat that was up on the shore off, like before it would flood. So I remember once before he had lost his boat because it had flooded, and his boat had floated down the river. Well, what it seemed like is this time that there was a cat on the boat, and it was fairly large. I remember the tail swinging around in the air. It went from, there was like the bench seats on the boat. The body of the cat went from one bench seat to the other, so this was not like a normal house cat size. And I remember seeing its tail, kind of, moving like a cat tail. And my father commented and said that it must be a black lab. And I remember sitting there thinking, then I was like, no, I don't think that's a little dog. Just the way that the tail moves more cat-like. But it seemed like it was a little panicked and confused, and it just continued to float down the river. We watched it float down the river on this boat until it got underneath the bridge, and then my father continued driving on to our home. That's my encounter of seeing a big black cat in northeast Ohio when I was younger. Thank you for all you do on the show, and you have a great day.
Thank you, Gary. Now, I'd love to discuss with you further in regards to the grief counseling you'd mentioned at the front end of your call. Let me know the best way to set something up, and we'll make it happen. Now, as for your sighting, it seems your encounter took place about 75 miles from mine. And for those that aren't familiar, when I was around 10 years old, my brother, friend, and I witnessed something strange. A 4 to 5 foot long, not including the tail, black panther. Now I'll go into further detail on that in a upcoming Patreon episode, an episode I hope to record early next week. Now I wonder how the animal found itself on the boat, but the description that Gary gave certainly coincides with how any cat would act in a situation like that. I have 3 cats, and I constantly witness them getting themselves into situations they don't know how to handle, like getting onto a boat that is launched down the river. So thank you again, Gary, for taking the time to share your story. It's certainly strange that all these big cat sightings are in such close proximity. Now, I have several more stories to share with you, but before we do that, I have some announcements. As you probably have seen on social media, the new studio space is nearly finished. I've been working my butt off for the past 3 to 4 weeks to try to get this done in time for Season 7, and somehow I made it. I'm exhausted, but I made it. The new space is beyond inspiring. I have a little library section where I can actually do some real research and leave my work out uninterrupted. And the new studio space is better equipped for drowning out sounds and is much larger and gives me room to actually move around. So I say all that to say this. I want to thank each and every person that donated to help make this new studio and library space a reality. I honestly could not have done it without you guys, and for that I am eternally grateful. Now, for those that donated $40 or more, you get your own brick in the studio that I will carve whatever you'd like into it. Your name, a message, a simple drawing even. So all those people that donated should have received an email with instructions to submit your artwork. If you did not receive that email, please reach out to me and let me know. And for those that have replied, I've looked at every single one of them. I just haven't had time to reply. And I most likely will reply with a photo of the finished work once I get it done. So I'm going to go through the list once I get everybody back, but just know I am eternally grateful, and I will read everyone's name on the air next week. And for all those new listeners, if you have a story you would like to share, call the hotline at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. Or you can visit the Report Your Sightings tab on the website, which is monstersamonguspodcast.com, or you can email me directly at monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com. And lastly, I have a few new additions to add to the store, something I hope to get up this weekend. Due to a mix-up with my printer, we actually printed the wrong shirts. But that's not a bad thing. We get a brand new design out of the deal. The Mirrored Men shirts will be back in a couple of weeks, but for now I have a new Monsters Among Us logo shirt going up in the shop later today. And in addition, I have some small magnets that I'm also adding in there. So check back by the end of the weekend and all that stuff should be available. And the last thing I need to mention is Patreon. For all you Patreon supporters, you know that I've been seriously slacking on content for the past couple months, and that is about to change. I had a breakthrough the other day that gave me endless content, so now I have a goal in mind, and that's something I'm going to put forward. But that does come with a bit of a sacrifice. After much deliberation, I've decided that the Patreon videos will no longer be Patreon only. I'm going to release each new video to Patreon subscribers for about a week, and then I'm going to open it wide to everyone else on YouTube. And I'm doing this for one reason and one reason only. Videos like that help the show grow, so it does me no good whatsoever to hide them and only show them to maybe 100 subscribers. So as much as I'd like to reward each Patreon subscriber, I think the show would be better served to let hundreds, if not thousands, view these videos instead. So I'll give you the sneak peek, and after that, it will be released wide. But I will go into further detail on all of that through Patreon. And that should do it for the announcement, so what do you say we get back to the stories? Our next call of the evening comes to us from Tyler, in my now current state of California.
Hey Derek, my name's Tyler. I'm calling from Los Angeles, but I grew up in a small rural town in southwest Colorado on a farm. So I'm pretty familiar with the wilderness. I would go hiking almost weekly growing up. This happened whenever I was coming back home to visit my mother, who was working in Pagosa at the time. Pagosa is a town in Colorado, around southwest Colorado. So it was really late at night, and I was with my girlfriend at the time. She was sleeping in the seat next to mine, the passenger seat. And as we were going up through the mountains, it was pitch black, really dark, and I saw a large green ball of fire that was slowly crossing over the treetops, and it was so slow moving, and that I was able to wake my girlfriend up from her sleep and point it out as it crossed. I had slowed the car down, but it was just, it was big. It was, I would say, from side to side around like 20 feet, and I could see, it was close enough that I could see the texture of the flames coming off it. I could see that it looked like rock texture, as the rock, like a craggy texture to the ball of rock, but it had big green flames trailing off of it. And like I said, it was very slow moving. It just floated across and out of sight. Didn't know what to make of it. I went and asked my mom once we got there. I mean, I must have got there around 1 a.m. or something. And I asked her if there were any meteor showers or anything. She said there was nothing. Growing up, I was a big fan of ghosts, and that's whenever the Shadowlands was pretty big and everything. But I had never put any credence into aliens or UFOs or anything like that until this point. After that, I did some research, and the only thing I was able to find was there was a shower of green like meteors that happened around New Mexico. I'm not sure when it happened. I think it was like 80s or 90s, but I guess there was a lot of them that happened at the time, and a lot of people had seen it. It was a big deal whenever it happened. A lot of witnesses, but I had never seen anything like this in my life. And once I actually read Whitley Strieber's book, he had a similar thing happen to him where he saw a green ball of fire, but it was one of his false memories, which, I mean, I'm terrified of that, of any false memories or anything happening to me. But that was the only paranormal encounter I've ever had. I'd be interested to see if anybody else has had any experiences with or seen anything like that. Definitely the strangest thing that's ever happened to me. As far as the area goes, Pagosa, I mean, there's a lot of Indian reservations around, but nothing paranormal that I know of other than that. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Tyler. Now, to be honest, it sounds like what you saw was perhaps a meteor. So I did a little digging to see if meteors could be green in hue, and I found the following from the American Meteor Society. Vivid colors are more often reported by fireball observers because the brightness is great enough to fall well within the range of human color vision. These must be treated with some caution, however, because of well-known effects associated with the persistence of vision. Reported colors range across the spectrum, from red to bright blue and rarely violet. The dominant composition of a meteoroid can play an important part in the observed color of a fireball, with certain elements displaying signature colors when vaporized. For example, sodium produces a bright yellow color, nickel shows green, and magnesium as a blue-white. So as you hear there, a nickel-based meteor could produce a green glow. Now, of course, I wasn't there, so I can't say definitively if that's what it was Tyler saw that evening, but it certainly could fit the bill. Thank you again, Tyler, for sharing your story. Our next submission of the evening takes us to the state of Oregon. The following is Grace's submission.
Hi, this is Grace from Oregon. I called in previously and told a story about seeing a ghost. And I actually have another story of seeing a ghost. I've only seen physically 2 in my life, so this is the second one. This one happened in Portland, Oregon. About 4 years ago now. I was working at a veterinary hospital, and one of my coworkers unexpectedly passed at her home. But she had been working at this hospital for about 15 years and ran everything, was a very integral part of it. It was basically her home. So after she had passed, I was standing in the main room where we did the treatments on the animals, and there was a little back room we had where dogs and cats would stay if they were boarding with us. And we had a door that separated the 2 rooms, kind of like a classroom door where there's a little skinny window on the top half only of the door. So that's how this door was. So there's a little bit of a sight through. And there was a staff member that we had who typically stayed back there to do the laundry and check on the dogs that were there and entertain them a little bit. So I was talking to another coworker, and I was facing this door from the main room, and I was discussing with her one of the treatments that we were going to be doing and kind of putting out a game plan of how we were going to be going about this, and I said that we were going to need help and that I was going to go and get our coworker from the back room. At that time, I was looking at the door, and I saw her pass by the window. It's only the, top half of the body that I'm able to see in this little skinny window, and the really only features I was able to make out was the dark hair that looked like it was down, and this coworker who had passed frequently would wear her dark hair down. And the coworker who was taking care of the dogs also had long dark hair that she frequently wore down. At the time when I saw this person walk by the window, the person that I was in the room with noted that our person who was in charge of the animals was actually outside walking one of the dogs. And I told her that was strange because I had just seen her through the window into the back room. And she gave me a quizzical look. And I went back into the back room, and sure enough, no one was back there. And as I come out of that room, our current coworker, who had not passed, walked back in the building. That confirmed that I had seen something that was not one of our coworkers. It was very strange. I didn't see her again, but she did unscrew some light bulbs from back in that same room. And they were the long fluorescent type that live within a secondary plastic housing that you have to open and then unscrew. And they're pretty problematic to even do on purpose when you're changing them. And at one point, no one was in the back room. The door was closed. And one of them shattered onto the floor. So I'm not sure if she's still in that building. I'm not sure if that is what I saw, but it's the only explanation that I can come up with is that she's at her home away from home. Anyway, that's my only other story of seeing a ghost. I have some other paranormal encounter things that I'll call in another time, but hopefully that is something that you can use. Thanks for playing my other story. That was cool to hear and get your feedback on. Have a good night.
Thank you, Grace. Now, listening to Grace's call, a question popped into my head. Now, I assume hundreds, if not thousands of animals die in vet offices across the country each day. So, like hospitals, our vet offices claim to be infested by ghosts as well. But unlike human hospitals, are they infested with the ghosts of animals? Are there any listeners out there that work in veterinary offices that may have experienced animal ghosts? Let's hear from you guys. Is this a true phenomenon, or is this something that I cooked up in my head? Either way, thank you again, Grace, for taking the time to share. I like to believe your coworker enjoyed working there so much that she clocked in from beyond the veil. And that brings us to our final call of the evening. The following is Tony's call from the state of Florida.
Hey, I appreciate your time. This is Tony from Tampa, Florida, originally from Seattle. I've been wanting to call for some time now about something that happened when I was 16 and was with my older brother camping up in the San Masac, Roslyn area, Cle Elum area up in Washington. I forget exactly where, but it was a campgrounds out in the sticks, in the woods below the glaciers. You could see from our campground. I was 16, and there's a bunch of us annual camping trip. It was the 80s, 1982. 3 days of volleyball, beer, and just having a good party 80s time. We went hiking, decided to go hiking on the hills up on the glaciers, and it was morning, and previously we had seen some bear, in particular a mother bear and a cub up on the glacier the day before, and we got up there. It took hours to get up to the top, and we all were walking in a single file line, and I heard this noise. It was like a grunting noise. Pardon my impression. It went like with a steady cadence. The guys in front of me looked around at me and shrugged their shoulders like, "What's that?" I just raised my eyebrows. I don't know. It went on for like 20 minutes. I assumed it was a bear since we'd seen bear in the area. And I haven't really forgotten it this whole time. It was odd. My interest in Bigfoot or things that go bump in the night, cryptids, has grown over the decades, and I've looked up so many bear sounds, YouTube, and anywhere you could hear a sound of a bear, and I cannot find the same sound. And honestly, it sounded like a big grunting ape or a primate. And the thing that struck me about it was the fact that it wasn't loud, but the sound was big. It was all encompassing. I didn't know where it was coming from. You could look all around and feel like that grunting was everywhere. Like I said, it wasn't loud, but it was a big sound. If that makes any sense. It's just really, really strange. And the weird thing about it is, like I said, it went on maybe for like 20 minutes, but all of us just seemed to forget about it. like it never really happened. I hadn't really thought about it until a few years ago when I started listening to podcasts and strange encounters out in the woods. Maybe nothing, but I'm sure it wasn't a bear because I can't find anything online that a bear would make as far as a noise like that. Anyway, love your podcast. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed listening to this odd little tale. I'll call back with a couple other things. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tony. Now, I know Tony said he didn't believe the sounds he heard that day came from a bear, but I thought it was important to share some of the weird sounds that bears can make. The following clip was provided by Alex Triceratops123 on YouTube. Of course, those sounds were of a black bear, which is indigenous to the state of Washington. Now, to question things further, here's another strange sound captured, quote-unquote, in the western states. It doesn't exactly say where, but the following clip comes courtesy of Over the Hill Outdoors on YouTube.
Don't know if you can hear this, but it's a sound that could be mistaken for something else. Right now it's growling, kind of low, guttural, moaning sound. Minutes ago, it was kind of a high volume yell, scream kind of a thing. What it is, it's a big black Angus bull. He's out here just letting his presence be known. Some cows and calves along with him. But on a dark night, out in the middle of nowhere, you heard that the first time, you might wonder.
I highly suggest you go out and check both videos out. Again, links can be found in the show notes for tonight's episode. So the point I'm trying to make here is not that Tony is lying or even mistaken, but instead I'm trying to point out that in an unfamiliar woods, sounds take on a life of their own and can lead people to think all sorts of strange things. Now, of course, I hope that what Tony heard was actually a Sasquatch. What fun would it be otherwise? Thank you again, Tony, for taking the time to share. Maybe you can chime in on either the bear sound or the bull sound that we played here on the show. And that's going to do it for this episode of Monsters Among Us. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Addie Lloyd, Warren Pon Abbott, and Tony Bell. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. Music for this episode was provided by Mayu and Coag Music. Thank you all for listening, and until next week. Hi there. You just stumbled on the secret part of Monsters Among Us podcast. And tonight, I have 2 written submissions for you, both submitted anonymously and both of the squatchy variety. Our first story goes as follows. A few weeks ago, I was vacationing in southern Washington, and me and my dad and sister were walking through the forest behind her college. There's an old watchtower, and we climbed up the 3 stories. It was early morning, probably 8 a.m. We were looking around, and all of a sudden we heard really weird noises. We stayed up in the tower and looked around to see if we could find what was making the sounds. My dad didn't think it would be safe for us to go down, so we stayed up there for a few hours until I saw something really big and hairy run through the trees, followed by the same strange noises we heard in the first place. Finally, my dad decided it was safe for us to leave, and when we got down to the ground, we ran back to the college, never looking back. And for the second anonymously submitted story. So about 3 weeks ago, I went bull hunting up on Diamond Mountain. Me and my dad were walking up a straightaway when we saw a monster's 7-point run over the top. So we took off and reached the top right before the sun peaked, so at about 7-ish. We got to the top, and that's when we saw a big thing walking out of the trees into a clearing about 1 or 2 miles from the top. But from our positions, we could see it perfectly. It looked like a man covered in hair. But when we looked through the binoculars, we realized how big this creature was. It turned toward us and looked like it was staring right at us. Then it turned and ran. We tried to follow it the best we could, but it was unnaturally fast. After chasing its trail for about an hour, it seemed as though it had fallen off the face of the earth. We have no clue what it was, but the footprints were about 18 inches in length and the stride was about 7 feet. There's nothing else it could be other than the elusive Bigfoot. Well, thank you to both submitters. As you know, I am a huge Bigfoot fan. There are several Diamond Mountains across the country, so I'm not specifically sure where the second story came from, but I can say that the first, coming from the state of Washington, certainly comes from one of the biggest Bigfoot hotspots on the planet. Thank you again to both of those submitters, and thank you for sticking around to the end of Monsters Among Us. Good night. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Cryptid Crate, the first and only monthly box subscription service for fans of cryptozoology. It just so happens that this weekend we are holding our annual Dogman Days of Summer sale, where you can pick up full crates for $35. It's a value of nearly $80 apiece. And I actually have some Cryptid Crate lights that I'm letting go for $15. So visit www.cryptidcrate.etsy.com or visit the link in tonight's show notes for more details.
It does it.
Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I'm your guide, Derek Hayes. Welcome to the show, guys. The show that almost wasn't. I'm still having some major computer issues here in the studio. I actually purchased a replacement that showed up to be a complete dud. The computer didn't work at all, so that set me back several days. So I've now purchased a even newer model. Hopefully this time's a charm. Unfortunately, it doesn't arrive until tomorrow. So here I am, recording on my rickety laptop. Hopefully, this pans out. Now, due to the circumstances tonight, will be a bit of a grab bag episode. So without further hesitation, I think we should get started. Our first call of the evening comes to us from, I believe they call it the Beehive State. The following is Alexander's call from Utah.
Hey, Eric. My name is Alexander. I'm calling from Utah. So this happened over a space of some amount of time, over a few months. This is a couple of years ago. I was the manager of a movie theater
we were up in the mountains, right? One day, I was there closing by myself with another manager, and we heard a big crash and went out, and in one of the storerooms, everything had fallen off the shelves, which just could have been an earthquake. That's no big deal. But it was kind of a hint of what happened later. So the way that this was set up is that when you went up the stairs to go into the booth of this movie theater, you could look to your left, and if you looked left, you could see all the way down the hallway into that storeroom where everything fell off. And right next to that storeroom was one of the projectors. This was an old projector, and it was kind of finicky. It tended to have issues most days. Was the reason why I didn't think too much of it when I was opening one Sunday. I opened every Sunday morning by myself. It was not very busy early in the morning on Sundays for obvious reasons in Utah. And so one day I went upstairs, and I took a look to my left, and I saw that projector, and each projector has a tail light on it. It's this light that sits on the back of the projector that is different colors. So if it's green, that means the projector's good. If it's blue, it means that they need to do routine maintenance on it. And if it's red, that means there's a problem with the projector and it's not going to work. And of course, red tail lights, when you're a manager, give you like a heart attack because it means you have to cancel a show if you can't fix it. And there's a ton of paperwork and people get mad at you, and it's a mess. So the last thing I wanted to see when I walked up that stairs and turned left is to see right before my eyes the tail light of that projector turn from green to start blinking red, like I watched it change. So I started to go down there to see what the problem was, and it was dark up in the booth. It's always dark. You don't want light leaking out into the theaters. But there are some lights up there. So I started walking down to the projector and then realized that I wouldn't be able to see anything even if I went down there without my phone flashlight. So I went and turned on the lights in that booth. So I turned on the lights and turned around. I saw the outline of a person standing in the doorway to that far storeroom. It was like kind of fuzzy, and I took a step back and it seemed to almost follow me. Like I took a step back and it moved forward a little bit as though it was like keeping an exact distance between me and it. And it spooked me out. And so I kind of backed up and I hid in the office because I'm a coward, right? I'm not going to run up at a ghost or something standing in the storeroom. So I went back and hid in the office for a little bit to start up the safe. And I poked my head back out about 5 minutes before I needed to go down and unlock the doors to let the next person in. And the lights on the projector had turned back to green, so it was just fine. The thing was gone, whatever it was. I didn't see the outline of the person anymore. And normally I would have just brushed that off as well, you know, with the earlier story about the things falling off in that storeroom. Could just been an earthquake. This could just been a trick of the lights. Except that I was set to transfer to a new location in a couple months, and so every Sunday before I transferred, I would walk up those stairs and take a look to the left, and every time I did, I would watch that tail light turn from green to red. It would wait for me to look at it, and then it would turn. And then every time I turn on those lights, and I'd see somebody standing in that far storeroom, and then it would go away as soon as I went in the office. Every time I would step back, when I was looking at it, every time I backed up, it would follow me. But every time I went towards it, it would also get a little bit closer. So I don't know if that was like a lure or something. Like it wanted me to go down there for whatever reason to check out that projector. But that happened every single Sunday. And let me tell you, that theater was pretty creepy. It wasn't just me that thought that. Every single time an employee would go up there for their break, we had the employees, the floor staff would take their break up in that booth. They would sit with their backs to the wall so they could look down that hallway, because I had multiple of them tell me that they didn't like sitting with their back to that hallway, that they felt like somebody was watching them, which it's a long, kind of dimly lit hallway, so I'm not sure I blame them. But on the other hand, after this happened, I was more and more sympathetic to that fact. I would almost never put my back to that storeroom whenever I was up there, and it felt creepier than almost everywhere else I've been. Now I'm kind of glad that I don't work there anymore. Thanks, Derek. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thank you, Alexander. I know that you mentioned that the theater was in a mountain town. Currently living in one of those myself, I can tell you that it has a bit of a magical atmosphere at times. And sometimes, it's got a downright creepy atmosphere. So I don't know if that plays a factor in the activity that was taking place in your particular theater, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. Thank you again, Alexander, for taking the time to share your call. Our next clip of the evening takes us to the Great Lakes. The following is John's call in the state of Minnesota.
Hey there, Derek. It's John Cold from Minnesota. Since it's cold here, it seems like a fitting last name. Figured it's a good time to share one of my UFO encounters with you and the Amongsters. So this one, this is actually my second encounter, but it's a quick one, and it's kind of entertaining, as the other ones aren't as kind of funny as this one is. We'll go back to, I believe it was around 1999, and it was before my daughter was born. We had just moved into a new apartment. My soon-to-be wife at the time no longer is as of now, but anyway, we moved into an apartment in Duluth, right on overlooking Lake Superior, and it was kind of an apartment complex, and we were on the very end. And a friend of mine and myself went out to have a cigarette, and as we were walking out the door, I just kind of walked straight out, and he kind of walked behind me and to the left of me. And this was probably about, it wasn't super late. It was probably like 9, 10 o'clock at night. We were just standing there, having a cigarette, BSing, and it wasn't a cloudy night or anything. It was a clear evening, clear night. Out of the corner of my eye, I wasn't facing it, but I saw it out of the corner of my eye, and I turned to catch a few seconds of it. And what I saw, it was actually like a large, almost like, I guess, for what I saw, what I could compare it to would be like a tall building on its side, but like dark and moving extremely fast right above the tree line. To the right of me, as you come out our apartment, there's a small like driveway and then a patch of trees that's probably about 50 feet or less. It's not really thick. You can see the road and cars driving on the other side of it through the trees. But this was above the tree line, and it was moving so fast, and there were some red flashing lights on it. And I just caught a glimpse of it, but it caught me off guard, and I turned to see if my friend saw it, and I looked at his face, and he had his mouth open and the cigarette fell out, so I'm guessing he saw it. So he looked at me, he's like, "What the F was that?" And I said, "I don't know. That was pretty crazy. Whatever it was moving pretty fast, and it was large. I guess it was a UFO." And he's like, "We have to tell somebody." So he goes running in our apartment, grabs the phone book, just whips it open. He looks at me, he's like, "Who do I call? Who do I call?" I'm like, "I don't think you're going to find him in the yellow pages." But he tried. So he's looking through the yellow pages, and he just finds, I don't know what he looked up, but he found a number. He's like, "I think this is it." So he calls the number, and he's like, "I just need to know, is this the number I called to report like a UFO or something in the sky that's unusual?" And then there's some silence on the other end. Then he hangs up. He's like, "I guess I called the fire department and somebody was sleeping. I feel like kind of an ass." So then he looks at me and he's like, well, what do we do about it? And I just looked at him like, I don't know. I don't think there is anything we can do about it. It was, before the new millennium, so the internet was still kind of new. I didn't know anything about like MUFON or anything like that. So I just told them like, it's something we just have to acknowledge we saw and, live with it. So I don't know if anybody out there has encountered this type of phenomenon or like a UFO that's like I said, the best I can describe it is just like a building without windows on its side, just totally dark with some red flashing lights on it. I mean, if I had to estimate, I would say it was probably a couple 100 feet long, maybe like 50 feet from bottom to top, width. And it was silent. That's another thing I didn't really mention. It made zero noise. I mean, like as it sped by, we didn't hear a sound at all. So yeah, that was an experience that I had. And again, this was right up by Lake Superior. I know that there's a lot of things that go on around Lake Superior. And it's actually said to be one of a porthole is supposedly in Lake Superior that UFOs and things used to get in and out of dimensions. I know I've read that in a few places that Lake Superior is area in it where they travel through or something like that. But anyway, keep up the great work and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you, John. Now, it's funny, when I was a child, I often thought the same thing. Who do you report something like this to? And when I was super young, I thought, obviously the police handle something like this. But as you grow older, you realize a lot of times the police are victims of stuff like this. And then, of course, the NBC series Unsolved Mysteries premiered in the late 80s. And they had a toll-free telephone number that I actually modeled our toll-free number after. And when I was a kid, I thought it was very important that I memorized that number, just in case I saw a gray alien or one of these murderers that you see traveling across the country. So how many of you also still remember that phone number? I can still hear Robert Stack saying it right now. 1-800-876-5353. If you wish, you need not leave your name. Either way, I love the story, and I honestly couldn't tell you what that is. But as we've learned on this show, UFOs come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. And thank you again, John, for sharing your call. Now, our next tale of the evening takes place in San Diego, California, but submitted by Stuart in Florida.
Hey, this is Stuart. I don't think I've called in since, I think it was season 1, actually. Called in about seeing a weird guy at a cemetery in South Carolina. But I was talking to my dad a couple weeks ago, and I asked him if he had ever experienced anything paranormal. And he told me this story that happened when he was in the Navy station out in San Diego. I'll do my best to get as many of the details as I can remember. Basically, my dad was stationed out in San Diego from around 1990 to about 1997. And my dad said this happened in 91. So I would have been about 3 years old. I don't know anything about the man that's involved in the story or anything like that, so I'm not going to try to explain to who he was or anything. But at the time, my parents lived in some really rundown apartments in a national city called Bluebell Apartments. Anybody who has lived anywhere around San Diego probably knows about National City. It's not a great area. And even at the time, the Bluebell Apartments were very rundown, and they were, unfortunately, there was a lot of crime in the area. But there was a man who lived in an actual house across the street from the Bluebell Apartments. And my mom had known the guy since they had moved there. Now, since my dad was active duty military, and especially in the Navy, he would, leave for weeks or months at a time for underways or deployments, whatever the Navy was doing at the time. And my mom had gotten to know the guy across the street pretty well. Now, my dad knew him in passing, but didn't really know him that well. But they still were at least cordial with each other. One night, my dad woke up in the middle of the night and decided, he was going to go have a cigarette before he went back to bed. I think he said it was about 1:30 in the morning. So he goes outside the front door, and he's standing outside smoking, and he notices that there are no lights, there's no noise, there's no people talking, there's nothing, which in San Diego, for it to be completely quiet, that never happens. It's never going to happen. It has never happened, not since San Diego was just a line of palm trees at the beach. It is nonstop all the time. Anybody who's been out there or lived in any major city can tell you that it never gets so quiet that you can't hear anything. So my dad thought that was weird, and actually, that woke him up and snapped him out of his, half-sleep stupor. So my dad's looking around, and he notices that there's one street light on, and it's the street light across the street at the old man's house. And now my dad, the way he explained it to me was basically he saw the one street light on and thought, that's weird. Smoked his cigarette. Since there was no lights or noise or anything, he looked up at the sky and was admiring the stars, put his cigarette out, didn't really think anything of it, went back to bed. Now my dad had to be up and out of the house about 4 in the morning to get to base on time to get changed into uniform and start work. And so, my dad gets up later that morning after he going back to sleep. He goes to work. And then my dad gets home that evening, and again, this was back in the early 90s, before, everybody was carrying a cell phone or anything. So my dad gets back that evening to the house, and my mom is crying. And my dad says, what's going on? What's happening? And my mom, explains to him that the old man across the street died last night in his sleep. And my dad asks how, and my mom says that she didn't know. The only information that she could get from the paramedics is that he died at about 1:30. And at that point, my dad starts thinking about, when he woke up in the middle of the night. So he said there was one thing that did stand out that he remembered, that it didn't really register at the time. And that was that, again, there's no lights, there's no noise, which again in San Diego is extremely bizarre. But my dad said that right before he finished his cigarette, he remembered that the street light, the only one that was on the old man's house, that cast light on the old man's front door, he said that was, he thought about it, and he realized that right before he was finished smoking, it started flickering and then went out. So my dad, put his cigarette out, went inside, and thought it was weird, but again, you're half asleep, you're not really thinking all that well. Both me and my dad are extremely heavy sleepers, so it takes us a good 10, 15 minutes after we wake up to become fully coherent. So I fully understand that, something weird like this would happen. It wouldn't register with my dad. But to this day, my dad believes that he really did watch the old man's, for lack of a better term, life flicker out that night with the street light. And so that's basically it. I tried to get more information from my dad, but again, this was back in like 90 or 91. So my dad didn't really remember much detail. Keep up the good work. Really enjoying the show, and I hope to, keep listening to it in the future. Makes my my midnight drives a lot easier to handle. Keep it up. Bye.
Thank you, Stuart. Now, this call actually takes me back to another terrifying love-hate relationship from my childhood. I'm talking about the Fox series sightings. Now, I specifically remember in one segment, and I know I've talked about it before, but there was a man that claimed to be able to manipulate street lamps. He can make them come on and go off at will. Well, of course, they took him out there, and he wasn't able to do it, replicate it whatsoever. But I remember the segment, so anytime I hear a story that's even remotely mentions street lamps, that's one of the first thoughts that always pops in my head. And I always wondered, did that guy really believe he could do this, or was he just simply trying to get on television? As far as the actual phenomenon that took place in the call is concerned, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, sometimes things just happen in mysterious ways. My initial thought was that perhaps there was some sort of power outage, and he was on a different grid. I know my neighbor, a house that's less than 20 feet away from me, is on a completely different grid, so when my power goes out, his stays on and vice versa. Other than that, maybe the old man just had a little light left in him. Now, our next story of the evening comes to us from Rich in the state of Illinois.
Hey, Derek, my name's Rich. I just listened to Season 5, Episode 8, and Albert from Southern Illinois was talking about big cats in the area. I actually have grown up in Southern Illinois all my life, and my grandparents own a lake house down there across from the Shawnee National Forest Preserve. And we have cattle farms that are across the street, and the cattle farm's son was actually out back checking on a new baby calf that was just born, and stumbled upon a panther or a mountain lion about to pounce on him. And so he never travels out there without a gun anymore. And so people have been wondering if there's big cats in Illinois, and I do believe them because we've been seeing them. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you, Rich. Now, the other day when my computer issue started, I knew I had to release a show, but I had nothing in the can. So I pulled out an old Patreon episode. If you haven't listened to it, I highly encourage you to do so. In that episode, I interview my brother Trevor about our experience seeing the alien big cat when we were children. Whatever these things are, it's quite obvious there seems to be something out there that people are seeing. Whether they're mistaking a natural animal, a domestic animal perhaps, or there's just simply something there that remains to be detected. I love the mystery, and it's obviously one of my favorite cryptids. So thank you again, Rich, for sharing your story. I have a couple more calls to share with you guys this evening, but before I do, just have a handful of quick announcements here. Be sure to follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and don't forget about that Facebook group. Additionally, you can find more content on patreon.com, and actually have a new episode coming out as soon as this new computer arrives. And if you're playing the drinking game where you drink every time I mention the word computer, drink up. And lastly, there's still some shirts left. The glow-in-the-dark shirts went like crazy. They're actually not even here yet, and I've already sold half of them. They show up later today, according to the tracking information, so I will get those things out sometime on Friday. And I should also mention that I'm working on several other items to put in the shop. I know there's a mug coming, there's different stickers coming, I even have a pennant that I'm working on, so stay tuned. If there's something you guys want in the shop, by all means, send us a message and let us know, and we'll try to get it in there for you. And on that note, our next story of the evening takes us to a good old summer camp. The following is Alice's call from New England.
Hi there, Monsters Among Us fam and Derek. My name is Alice, and I am calling about an encounter I still don't know quite what to make of from, 6 years ago. I will add that I am going to be a little generic with names. Alice is not my real name, and location, as it involves a place that still exists and is still functioning, and I don't want to harm that area in any way. But anyway, this takes place in the woods of New England on a lake at a summer camp that I grew up going to. My parents were connected to, ended up working at for a long bit of time. This was the summer of 2013. And during Labor Day weekend, some of the summer staff are given the opportunity to stay a little bit longer if they don't have any fall job plans lined up or they don't have any immediate responsibilities, and help the camp run an alumni event. So, parents can come with their kids and do a lot of campy activities right before the end of summer. So when that happens, the assistant staff were kind of housed in random spots all over the camp. And I decided this year, I had just graduated from college, still trying to figure out what my next step in life was going to be. And I had time to kill, so I figured, why not let's stay. So some other staff friends decided to stay too, and we were put up in this old building that used to be part of a farm that was renovated for the horse program teachers to stay during the summer. It's at the very border of the camp's entrance, and you have to walk like a mile from there back into camp. So it was a bit of a hike, but we were staying up there one evening, and I remember waking up out of a dead sleep. I passed out, and then all of a sudden I find myself, don't wake daddying up out of bed. You know, that board game where if you hit a button, the thing would spring right up into a 90-degree angle. I've never done anything like that before. I'm a pretty solid sleeper, no sleep paralysis, history, no fitful dreams or anything. And I wake up out of bed, and I should add a little context. The way that this building was lined up, it was basically a very large rectangle, and there were 4 beds lined up parallel against the wall, and I was in the bed by a huge picture window closest to the entryway where there was a bunch of cars parked. And I shoot up out of bed and all of a sudden find my head turning to the left towards my best friend Cora. She was sleeping in the bed next to me. And I look over and I see this figure, tall, thin, it was a shadow, wearing what appeared to be a baseball cap, also dark in shadow, darker than the room around us. And sitting with for whatever reason, it was very clear to me that it was a man, with his legs crossed one over the other, much like a woman typically does, kind of jangling his foot, just sitting there. And it was like I don't want to say trance because that implies that I didn't have any control, but I was too out of it to know what was going on enough to be afraid. So I just kind of said very sleepily, Cora, who is that man? And I was in a cabin full of women, and in the middle of the night in the woods, when you say that, it taps into some sort of primal fear, and everybody woke up. Nobody else was seeing what I was seeing. Cora was like, what man? Who? What are you? And I said, at the foot of your bed, the man. And she replied, Alice, I don't see anything. What are you talking about? And I could still see this figure, which I can picture in my mind's eye, and it freaks me out to this day. And I was like, Cora, move your legs to try and see if I could get whatever this entity was to move. And so she, her legs were in a sleeping bag, and so she kicks to her left, which unfortunately was not where the shadow creature was sitting. And then I said, Cora, you missed it, the other way. And I'm communicating with a lot more urgency now because I was terrified, but in the moment it was all very sleepy and hazy. And I said, to the right, and she obliged. And her legs went through what I was seeing, and the figure evaporated. And I must have fallen back asleep because the next thing I remember, I'm waking up. I didn't dream it because my friend in the cabin and at camp, because I was telling the story the next morning at breakfast, a little freaked out, still give me sass about it to this day. But yeah, it was something I can recall very clearly, and I never felt super comfortable being alone in that cabin again. And I should add that it is a religious camp, and as a woman of faith myself who grew up with it's a bit more liberal now, but a very strong faith, I've always believed in the concept of supernatural warfare. And I couldn't tell you with certainty whether I believe in ghosts or what have you. I do believe in evil, and there are other stories, which now could be, the urban legends that surround any long-running summer camp about different spooky things happening. And at a religious camp that's really popular and does really wonderful things for kids, it doesn't surprise me that evil forces would be concerned and trying their best to, thwart and cause mischief. That happens very rarely. I'm not implying that this camp is overrun with demons or anything, but that is my tale. Derek, thank you so much for this podcast. It's a really great listen, and so glad I had an opportunity to spin my spooky yarn. I hope y'all enjoy it. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you, Alice. No, unfortunately, as a child, I was never able to attend summer camp. I know I did a couple days for a outdoor education program through our local school, but that wasn't quite the same thing. As someone that grew up in the 80s, I quickly became a fan of movies like Friday the 13th and its plethora of sequels. So the idea of a creepy, ghostly encounter at a summer camp really speaks to me. I should note that I really enjoy the fact that Alice coerced her friend to basically wave her foot through a full-body apparition. I wish I could have seen that. But thank you again, Alice, for taking the time to share your story. And that brings us to this call from Alexis in the state of Florida.
Hi, Derek. My name's Alexis. So this story, well, I have a couple stories. They're actually not mine. They come from my dad, and they were some experiences of his friends. After hearing Season 7, Episode 14 about the pterodactyl quote-unquote sighting, I immediately remembered the story that my dad told me when I was younger, and I called him earlier today to confirm the details. So the first part of the story, my dad is from Pennsylvania, in a small town outside of Pittsburgh, and he had a friend that told him that he was walking home at night and it was rainy, and I don't have a lot of details about what he saw, but he looked on the roof of a building, and there was he said a pterodactyl sitting with its wings curled up and looking right at him as he walked by, and he said that he was terrified, and he walked a little bit faster, and the pterodactyl continued to watch him as he walked. So my dad also had another friend that didn't know this first friend that told him the story about the pterodactyl, but he told my dad that he was hunting in an area really close to where this first sighting was, in the little patch of woods there, and it was before the sun came up. He was sitting under a tree, kind of waiting, for something to come by. And he heard a screech come from the tree that he was sitting underneath from the top. And he said it was so powerful and loud that his first thought was not anything natural, not a bird or anything that, that's natural at all. So when my dad heard that, of course, he connected the two stories, and he thought, there's something going on here. These two people that I don't even know have similar encounters in the same area of, Pennsylvania where he's from. So I thought that was really crazy. This was probably back in the 70s or something, 60s, when my dad was younger. So the second part of the story is similar, not quite the same, but it has to do with a winged creature also comes from my dad. He had a group of friends when he first moved down to Florida, which is where I live now, and he had a friend that told him a story, and when they got together with their whole group of friends, they retold the same exact story with the same details in a group, because they had all been there when it happened. So they were walking around at night in this small town in southern Florida, probably pretty rural area, and they came across a school with a playground in the back. So they were messing around, and my dad said that they had mentioned there was a floodlight back there, so they could see pretty well. And in the corner of this playground, they spotted this humanoid creature. he described it as like a kind of like a bat person that had like dark scaly-ish skin and wings under its arms, and that's kind of all the details that I have. But my dad said that his friends had all described it in exactly the same way because they had all been there. I guess they had been like outdoorsy type people, and they weren't scared of anything. You know, they faced alligators and snakes down here in Florida and such, so they approached this thing because they weren't really scared. They all kind of surrounded it, and it looked terrified, they said. It was trying to get away from them, but it was trapped in a corner. So it began like flapping its wings. That's what they said, that it had some sort of wings under its arms. And it tried to fly away, but it was getting overwhelmed because they were kind of surrounding it. And it was breathing really heavily. And then he said that it shot straight up in the air and made like a 45-degree angle turn and flew right away from them. And the way my dad described it, like, they were all so excited describing the story, and they all had the same details, so it's pretty hard to imagine they were lying. He was very convinced by them, and I just think it's pretty crazy. So yeah, I don't know what that could have been at all. Sort of similar to the pterodactyl story, because they both are like winged cryptids, I guess. These stories reminded me a lot of the pterodactyl theme that was coming up, and I hope that somebody maybe can recognize these stories or something similar, and they can maybe continue and add on to it. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Alexis. Now, as I probably mentioned a few times, my dad is a listener. Hi, Dad. I was talking with my dad on the phone just after playing a pterodactyl sighting call on a recent episode, and that's when he informed me that when he was a child, he saw something he described as a pterodactyl. Now, according to him, they were walking from town to his home, which is about a half a mile's walk from the tiny village we grew up in. As he was walking, overhead he saw what he described as a large, hairless, bird-type creature with the crest on the back of its head and the angled wings, somewhat like a bat. Now, if I recall the story correctly, he quickly told his brothers, who were walking with him, who obviously didn't see it, and they instantly began ripping on him. Perhaps that sort of treatment is the reason that it took him almost 40 years to tell me about that story. Now, do I believe that there are pterosaurs and pterodactyls flying around the modern United States? Not really. I can't really swallow that pill. But there have been a lot of sightings of things that can only be described as pterosaurs or pterodactyls. Stories like this one.
A man in Northern Oregon says he saw a big bird that sounded like a dinosaur. The man, who provided a full name but asked to remain anonymous, told Cryptozoology News on Tuesday that he works as a campus security guard. He says he was taking out the trash at approximately 1:30 a.m. when the creature showed up. It flew from behind a house across the street and glided back to the ground. I was caught off guard by its size and screeching sound, said the Philomath resident. It sounded like an old movie's dinosaur. He described the creature as a flying being, with the wingspan of about 3/5 to 4/5 of the length of the house's roof. The wings, he said, were bent, and its head had a short and curved beak. The security guard adds that he was able to see the animal in the dark because of the light from a nearby mill.
And that clip comes to us from Cryptozoology News. I highly recommend you guys hit that up every morning for your daily Cryptozoology News update. Now, as if the mention of the pterosaur/pterodactyl/flying reptiles, or whatever you want to call these things, Alexis also mentioned what kind of sounds to me like the Mothman. Now, she described a upright bipedal creature with some sort of scales or feathers or something on its skin, a dark brown or gray color, and wings under its arms. That's 3/4 of a Mothman description. Now, what gives me pause is the fact that there was no mention of bright red eyes, or the lack of a neck or strangely shaped head. Outside of that, a lot of the description here sounds very consistent with what I've heard from Mothman reports throughout the country. Now, speaking of Mothman, I just found out yesterday that I actually am going to be attending the Mothman Festival this year, but only for a day. I will be there for a majority of the day on Saturday. I won't have a booth or anything like that. I'll just be walking around messing with people. So if you see me walking around, be sure to say hi. And that's going to do it for this episode, but before I kick out of here, if you have a story you'd like to report, simply call the hotline at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. Or click on the Report Your Sightings tab on the website, which is monstersamonguspodcast.com. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Addie Lloyd, Warren Ponabbott, and Tony Bell. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. And that music you're hearing, that's Coag music. Thank you all for listening, and until next week. Given my recent computer issues, I decided I'm going to play a call rather than read a written submission. So tonight's bonus content is brought to you by Brandon.
Hey, this is Brandon. I'm from Zebulon, North Carolina. This happened like about 2 years. I came in one day into class and I sat down. And my friend beside me, he's like, dude, guess what? We went to the park, right? And we found this old graveyard, like, from the 1900s. And we were like, for real? And I was like, for real? And I was like, why don't we just go, like, at night? And he's like, nah. He's like, nah, I don't really want to do that. I was like, dude, let's go, like, around, like, 3 o'clock. Because that's where I hear is, like, when all the ghosts come out and stuff like that. So we decided to go one day. So we went, and we got there. Only 3 of us went inside because the rest were kind of scared. We started going through this trail in the back of the park. I decided to record just in case we, like, saw something. So we started walking, and we would hear, like, a bunch of noises, which obviously is the woods, so we probably thought it was, like, some squirrels or some other animals. And there was this noise that was louder than the rest. I don't know how it was, but it was really loud. And when that happened, one of my friends she was in the car. She called back, and she was like, what was that noise? And we were like, I don't know. We just heard a loud noise. She was like, really? It sounded like a car from over here. I was like, it didn't sound like a car from where we were. And literally as soon as, like, she called, since the recording stopped, we saw this apparition. It was this lady, and she was dressed, like, in all white. And we could see her hair go down, and she was wearing this white dress. And we had our flashlights, and we were pointing at her. This was kind of weird because I felt like we were there for, like, about 5 minutes looking at her, but I know it was only for a few seconds. And she's like, well, what are you guys watching? What are you seeing? And we were like, there's this lady right here in front of us. We didn't feel nothing. I didn't feel I didn't feel scared or nothing. It was just, like, calm, and I could just see her, but it was really weird. And my friends, they were, like, kind of like, I don't know, I kept calling. I was like, dude, are you okay? I was like, dude. And they wouldn't respond until I shook one of them. I was like, dude, what was that? He's like, dude, I don't know. And he's like, I was like, what should we do? And one of my friends in the front was like, and he just started running, and I was like, let's just start running too. And we started running, and like, so we got to the car, and they're like, what did y'all see? We were like, this lady in white. And she's like, that's all? And we were like, yeah. So we went back to my house that night, and me and my friend were like, what was that? And he's like, I don't know, dude. It's a lady. And we decided to come back in the morning because we thought it might have been something else, right? Like, I don't know, because they hunt a lot over there. So maybe it was like a reflection of something. And we went, and there was literally nothing there. It was like nothing that could make something like that. She was like bright, and her hair was long, black. She was wearing like this dress, but there was nothing there that could, like, that could resemble that. Thank you. I love your podcast.
Thank you, Brandon. A little word of caution. Be careful sneaking around in cemeteries at night. Without the proper permission, you can spend the night in jail. I, too, have spent a good amount of time sneaking around cemeteries at night. Not to vandalize or graffiti anything. Just simply looking for scary stuff. I can tell you the cemetery at night has its own bag of tricks. When you walk by tombstones, they echo your footsteps. And a shining light on some polished stones. I swear it's moving. But in all my outings, visiting cemeteries all over the state of Ohio, I never once saw an apparition. And although you may not feel lucky, I definitely consider you to be very lucky to see such a sight. Thank you again, Brandon, for sharing your call. And thank you for sticking around to the end of the program. Have a great night. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Cryptid Crate, the first and only monthly box subscription service for fans of cryptozoology. Visit cryptidcrate.com today to learn more, and use coupon code MONSTERS88 for 10% off. Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I'm your guide, Derek Hayes. Welcome to Monsters Among Us, a call-in show about monsters, and more specifically, the people that see them. Now, I have an incredible episode lined up for you guys this evening, and I want to kick it off with something a little different. I don't think I've ever started a show with a Bigfoot call. Well, that is, until now. Hailing from the state of Georgia, we jump right into tonight with Greg's submission.
Hi, my name is Greg. I'm calling to you from Georgia. My story is one that happened back in probably 1973. At that time, I was like 5, 6 years old. It was a time when kids could be sent to the store to buy their parents' cigarettes or could buy buy them for themselves or whatever. Tobacco, there wasn't a age limit, so to speak. So we lived in a trailer park for a short period of time before my family moved into a house a town over. So in this trailer park, you could walk through the woods to a little convenience store. You know, you could go through the woods or you could take the long route and you could walk closer to the highway at the edge of the woods and go to this store. It was roughly, if I had to guess, between a mile through the woods to a mile and a half, you know, around the woods. So my story is this. So my father gave me $1. Back then you could get a pack of cigarettes for, I believe it was like 45 cents. And I'd been through these woods many, many, many times. We lived in this trailer park for a couple of years. I got his pack of cigarettes as well as something for myself. And as I was walking on my way back, I was going back through the woods. It's a pine forest. There's lots of pine trees in Georgia. And there's little shelves where the landscape kind of drops kind of suddenly, so you could kind of jump or whatever. So it kind of left you a little ridge, maybe 3 or 4 feet high. Again, I was probably around 6 years old when this occurred. I was walking back to the trailer park. Peaceful, it's quiet. We're right in the area where you kind of start to go this upslope, and there's some ferns and things like that. The day itself was, is a typical spring day kind of thing in Georgia. Things were bloomed, lots of tree pollen, that kind of thing. As I'm walking up to go up this ridge, I see a deer coming, and this deer comes straight at me. And my instinct was just to lay down, to fall down, to keep from getting, because it looked like it was going to hit me. So I threw myself back and on the ground, kind of flat on my back, as this deer come running over me with a sheer look of terror on its face. You know, it's kind of one of those things when you're a kid, you've never seen a deer before. It just kind of burns into your brain. Well, when I threw myself back on my back, I saw the deer come over me, and then I saw what was chasing it. And what was chasing it looked to me, looking back on these things, was some kind of bipedal bear or ape man or Bigfoot, whatever you guys want to call it. So the deer and the hairy Bigfoot thingy came over the top of me, and the deer, once it hit the ground, immediately changed direction and went to the left. And the thing following it or chasing it immediately turned as well. And I just watched them go out of sight. I was shaken up. Again, I was like 6 years old. I didn't really know what I'd seen. You know, your brain can't really process something you haven't seen or didn't know about, that kind of thing. I thought it was maybe a bear, but it was on 2 feet. It was running, and you know, you see a bear on TV or at the zoo. They don't move very fast, and this thing was running as fast as I've ever seen anything run in my life. And I immediately hopped up and I ran out of the woods the opposite direction towards the highway, and went the long way around all the way home. I had dropped the package that I was carrying, a brown bag with the cigarettes and a candy bar. When I got to my home, you know, I told my father what I'd seen, and he was very unhappy and asked me what color it was. And I said it was like dark brown, maybe like hints of like gold, you know. And I immediately got a spanking because I was lying, so to speak. And there was only black bears in Georgia and not brown or golden bears, so to speak. And was sent back to get the pack of cigarettes. I was terrified. I took the long way around. I went exactly the way to where that little fern area was and weeded through that as slow as I could. I mean, just shaking, waiting to get this pack of cigarettes I ran, grabbed the bag, ran back out of the woods, and pretty much ran all the way back home and never spoke of it again. I kind of put it out of my mind until years later. I was watching something on one of the TV channels where a police officer had captured something running across the road in northeast Georgia. And I was maybe 30 miles from where that occurred. And it just kind of brought all those memories back. Since I listened to the show, I thought I would just share this with you and the listeners. And there's definitely something out there. I know we don't have supposed evidence of it, but, I can't deny what I've seen. So, and I don't think I'll ever be able to forget that. I hope this helps anybody that wants to share what they've seen come forward, so to speak. So, thank you. Y'all have a great day.
Thanks, Greg. Now, as I'm listening to Greg's call, one small detail really jumps out at me. I find it incredibly interesting that he struggles to name the creature, despite the fact that all the details seem to be there. So why is it so difficult for Greg to say the word Bigfoot or Sasquatch? It's almost as if the very utterance of the word stresses him out, or at the very least, disgusts him. Why is this significant, you might be asking? Well, I can look at this one of two ways. Either this experience upset him so badly that, as an adult, he still struggles to say the words Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Either that, or Greg is a master hoaxer, and he just happened to have a hunch that I would pick up on that subtle detail and run with it. I think my decision is fairly obvious. I believe he saw something terrifying. Something matching the description of a creature that we all call Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Now the question we're left with is plain and simple. What was the creature? Now I should also add that I love stories like these. They remind me of stories that my dad and uncles used to tell me when I was growing up, some of the shenanigans they got into in the early and mid-70s. So thanks again, Greg, for taking the time to share that tale. The following story might be yet another first for the program. This story was submitted by Orson in the state of Florida.
Hi, my name is Orson, and I've been listening to your show for a little bit now. I was introduced to it by my girlfriend, and love it. I've been binging on it for a while, and wanted to call in and tell you my creepy story. Anyway, so this was back in, I want to say 2013, 2012, and this was back in Florida, actually West Palm Beach to be exact. And I love taking walks every day. I used to like walking a lot. And in this particular night, I actually had forgotten to walk that day. And so late at night, it was probably like 10:30 p.m. or 11. And in Florida, I think this was around the wet season where it would rain a lot. So I think it had just stopped raining. So I wanted to kind of, do a little walk, maybe do a brisk walk before I headed to sleep. And usually, I talk to a friend or something while I'm walking or something. And then I realized it was kind of late. I go around the neighborhood, I'd say about 3 or 4 times before I call it a night. And I remember that I was on my phone with one of my friends. And it was like the second go around that I did around the neighborhood. And the first time around I went around, I heard this noise like a crying baby. But I ignored it because I was talking on the phone with my friend, and I just went around the neighborhood once. So I just thought, probably somebody's kid who's, crying. And so I didn't pay any attention to it. I went around the second time, and I still heard it crying. So I was talking to my friend on the phone, and I said to him, I said, "Hey, listen, don't you think it's kind of weird that there's a baby crying this late at night? Because by the second time around, it was probably, I want to say later, like maybe 11 or 11:30. So I thought that was weird, but I didn't pay no mind to it. I didn't go towards the noise, and I just continued on my walk. By the third time around, I could clearly hear what seemed to be a baby crying. It was like a continuing crying, like it had like a set pattern. It wasn't like, some babies that you hear that will cry a little, then cry louder, then cry. No, it was just very consistent and loud. So I told my friend, "Hey, let me call you back. I'm going to investigate this, and I'll call you and let you know if it was just crazy, me thinking something crazy, or if it really was something that is abnormal here." So I hung up the phone, and as soon as it did, it was about my third round halfway, I heard it. So at this point, I'm hearing this noise constantly. And I was walking towards the noise. I kept hearing it. And I kept hearing it. So as I walked closer and closer to the noise, it kept getting louder and louder. And what seemed to be a baby crying now appeared to be like, if you've ever heard what's the sound of a baby lamb,